And here we go. All right, I'm live with Chris Kivlahan. Just figured out how to pronounce that name. Chris, it's an honor to have you on the show today for the USL show. And we're going to talk about lower league soccer. We're going to focus on NISA here at the beginning. But, first of all, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. It's an honor. I mean, you've been at this for a long time. I thought we'd start with that, actually. Can you kind of enlighten us all and give me more specifics about how you came about getting into this world of soccer and specifically who you were writing for so long?
Yeah, so I write for Midfield Press. I started writing for Midfield Press. I think at the beginning of 2016, I want to say.
Mm.
Uh, Jason, the former editor in chief of the site, reached out to me. I was posting some stuff on like Reddit. He liked some of the stuff I posted. It's like, hey, do you want to write put some of your ideas into an article? So I was like, sure, why not? I had some free time in my hands at that point. I wrote a series of articles that, if you look back at like I think it was like my third article or something like that. I started doing a series on places where the NASL, which at the time was the sole second division, should look to expand. I was interested in the NASL because I'm a fan of the New York Cosmos, right?
Mm.
Uh, and if you go back and you look through that article, the different markets I picked out, right? Like USL like went to them and like in a bunch of cases they went with the investors I called out as who would be good investors for the market. So I don't know if like that's a coincidence or if they were like, "Hey, this is actually a good idea." I'm sure it's a total coincidence, but
I don't
kudos.
know.
I want to give kudos to USL on, and you don't catch me giving kudos to USL a whole lot, but is that very aggressive expansion program? Very. I think they've done a great job with that, and I tip my hat to them on it because I put a lot of thought into that stuff, and like those
Mm.
guys they were thinking about similar stuff and they executed, so good for them.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do think it's funny though because the more you get into, and I've only dipped my toe. This is something you're well versed in, but once you kind of delve into the underworld of lower league soccer, the less romantic it is in some ways, and the less things look like they're being run well, and they're not always being run well. And so, in that
Yeah.
regard, I wouldn't be surprised if someone heard you say some of those things, whether it was on the mic or not, and took it further. Perhaps I don't know. It's possible, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, listen, I mean, I've seen how the sausage is made, and I'll tell you what, man, everybody who's listening, it's better to not,
Yeah.
just enjoy your favorite team. Once you learn like too much about like the politics of everything that goes on, it actually does take a little bit of the fun out of it. And so I think most people are probably better off just like if you have a favorite club, whether they play in USL, your NISA Founders Cup, MPSL, UPSL, what have you, in the lower leagues, just enjoy it, have fun with it. Your local team is what matters. The leagues are you know weird structures that we have in this country that probably shouldn't exist, and it should
Mhm.
all be one system. But that's on the Fed. So
Well,
what are you
let's
gonna?
put a pin in that because I'd kind of like to finish our conversation with exactly that thought, and maybe so. Let's talk about specifics and then work our way back to that if we have time. Chris,
Sure,
I'm gonna want to go long on this, so I'm gonna try to push us along every once in a while. But let's dig right into the main reason we brought you in. You are focusing on NISA. I think you mentioned that a second ago, um, and they just had a bit of an announcement, and I think there's more to come. Can you get us started with, man, let's just go all the way back to the beginning and quickly give us a history and then maybe the new news after that.
sure. So I first got an inkling of what would become NISA when in February, I want to say of 2017. I met up with Peter Wilt in Southern California. He was out there helping the team that would become California United as a consultant. And I had communicated with Peter before, and he was gracious enough to meet up with me. We talked a little while. There's some interviews on the site from back then, and I got an inkling that he was working on something at that time, and he had been for a little while by that point. And that would become NISA. It was, the idea was a third division league that would link the NASL as the second division, with the NPSL, for example, below it, right, and give kind of like a middle tier that would allow eventual promotion or relegation, right? So that
Mm.
was the initial sort of what NISA was meant to be. And then later in the year, uh, after it was officially announced, it the NASL becoming unsanctioned, like, just blew everything up, right? Like, just everything went in a weird direction after that happened.
Yeah.
Those two, groups kind of, went their separate ways.
Yeah, they did. A lot of rumors around that as well, but I think people are already starting to forget that the plan originally was for there to be NISA and NASL at the same time, and that got interrupted very badly. What do you think? What do you think that would have looked like if those two things had figured it out and gotten started? Do you dream about that sometimes?
No, I kind of try not to dwell too much on that type of thing. I think the vision that Peter had, was that they would have that link up, and then I don't think that ever was really agreed on
Mm,
formally by anybody. I think it was an idea that some people liked, but it never really came together, right? And it's hard in lower division soccer, for people to um, agree on things, right?
yeah.
And a lot of people kind of have their visions, and I think that's one of the areas where USL has done well, is that they have a very clear hierarchy, right? With USL, the independent owner group, right,
Mhm.
of the league, so it's easier for them to, like, make decisions that are, um, clearly in one direction. Whereas when you structure the leagues with the the club owners owning the league, right, which is in some ways like a better, purer model, but you get a lot of a lot of cooks in the kitchen, right?
Yeah, and, it seems obvious talking to you now, but, I mean, I guess that is something about the USL that I do wanna hit on a lot of these things later, but I guess it is a lot less free in a way, if you wanna put it in a negative connotation about the USL, that it's less free, but I guess it's easier to get things and ideas worked out and put together, but, yeah, not as pure in that way either. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's just, those are the two sides of that coin, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, where's Nisa now? The NASL is gone. Nisa's going to try to put something together here, even as soon as this fall. Bring us up to speed on that if you can.
Yeah, so NISA is intending to play its first games on September 7th of this year. They've got 10 members, but it's not clear that all 10 of them will be ready to play for the fall. The fall is going to be a short season. There's going to be 8 games. So each club will have 4 home games. So it'll be similar in length actually to the Founders Cup, which I'm not sure exactly what that's going to look like at the moment. There have been some changes on that end as well. But so they're going to be about similarly sized tournaments, happening, or leagues happening at the same time. From sometime likely in September, certainly in Nice's case, through the following weeks. I would guess that would take them into November, and then for NISA there will be a winter break, and there will be a spring season, and there will be new teams that will be admitted for the spring season. So NISA is still accepting applications for the spring. I think in the last article I did, John Pruch said it would be through mid-July. They would be taking applications because they have to get everybody certified by U.S. Soccer. So there's like a period of time in which they need to look over it and then send it to U.S. Soccer, and every club has to be approved by U.S. Soccer. And I think that's probably true of USL as well. It's just how that process works.
Yeah. So if I remember correctly, they got sanctioned as well. Is that true? NISA did?
Oh yeah, NISA is sanctioned as
Thought so.
a Division III league, so they have the same level of sanctioning as USL League One.
Great. Okay, so it's official. That is some concrete building there, and a
Mhm.
little bit of concrete news about dates and who's starting and when. I guess the who isn't exactly all revealed. There are a couple announced, but only what, two or three or four.
They've announced the markets, so they're going to have a team in Providence. They're going to have a team in Connecticut slash I think New England's what's on the website. I'm hearing that it might be more Connecticut branding now. I guess TBD on that. We'll find out within
Mm,
the next couple of weeks because they're going to be doing the official announcements. There's going to be a team in Philadelphia. I'm just working my way down the coast here. There's going to be a team in Charlotte. There's going to be a team in Atlanta. Um, Miami FC has joined, but it's not clear that Miami FC will play in the fall. They're scheduled to participate in the Founders Cup, and I understand they will be participating in the Founders Cup. It's possible they could participate in both, given that
mm,
they're a professional organization, and both seasons are going to be somewhere around 8 games. I mean, they could play 16 games, right?
easy.
Um, so I don't know how that's going to shake out. And then there will be there's no longer going to be a team in Central Florida. At least that group has decided to move to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It's not. I don't know if they're going to start in the fall. They might be another one who waits till the spring. Not clear. Then there are three teams in Southern California. There's Los Angeles, which I understand is FC Golden State, who they have teams in both NPSL and the former PDL. I struggle to call it USL League Two because it's
I
a
do
short
too.
season league, and there's no way that would ever participate in its current form and promotion and relegation. So I just call it PDL because that's a little fanciful to me.
I don't
Um,
think that's too much of a stretch there. I feel you.
yeah, yeah. So there's Los Angeles, there's California United, who uh, I'm told, in the recent interview that will play in Orange County, and then there's San Diego 1904, the former NASL expansion team.
Mhm. Yeah, some cool teams in there for sure. Some teams that I would be excited to see play for sure. And it's always nice to get new markets out there. I always think that's really good. I thought the Baton Rouge one was a surprise, but there's really not much soccer. There's no pro soccer in Louisiana, so that would be a good start.
Yeah, there's Baton Rouge. There's some rumors about New Orleans, for 2020. So that would be certainly a nice little, uh, you know, rivalry within the state of Louisiana if that occurs. Um, so, so yeah, we'll see.
Mhm. And then let's talk about the leadership because obviously you mentioned Peter Wilt earlier. USL show folks are gonna know who he is. Everyone in US soccer, if they're nerdy enough, they should know who he is. Highly respected. It could be, a bit of a genius. He's doing good work in Madison in League One right now, but he's not a part of NISA anymore. Can you tell us who is a part of NISA? Because we were talking about that off mic, and they've been around for the duration, basically.
Yeah, so NISA was founded by Peter Wilt and Jack Cummins, and they ran the league through um, kind of early 2018, right?
Mm.
Unfortunately, Jack passed away, and then Peter had the opportunity to do what he does so well and launch a club, and this time in his home state of Wisconsin, and we've seen Forward Madison, and it's another wonderful job that he's done. Right, I don't think anybody does that better, and certainly no one does it better in the Midwestern United States than him. Right,
Yeah.
so that's going great. But there was a bit of a hole that happened when Peter left. So that was filled by a couple of the owners stepped up. Bob Watkins became the leader of the league, and that group kind of shepherded NISA through sanctioning. And in February they got sanctioned. But then there was this kind of weird period from like the sanctioning announcement up until a couple weeks ago, where like
Mm.
They got sanctioned, which was a huge victory, but then they
Yeah.
were like really quiet, which being quiet during sanctioning made sense because, like, hey, that's a really difficult process. Um, Thousands and thousands of pages, submitted to U.S. Soccer, right? I mean, it sounds like way harder than it should be. It sounds like the sanctioning process for like
Yeah.
a spaceship, but it is what it is, I guess. And so then the ownership in groups in NISA decided to make a change. John Pruch of Club Nine Sports has been involved since the very beginning with NISA, and he's got a team of people that he's working with, many of whom have been involved for a very long time. So
Mhm.
there's definitely continuity there since the early days with Peter and Jack.
Yeah, good. Which I didn't realize that, and so I think that should be a positive for sure. Um, some negatives, though. You mentioned being quiet. I think people have criticized how quiet the PR has been, how perhaps ineffective it's been, the little that they've done. There was a changing of the head guy, right, recently. We
Yep.
should ask you about that. But actually, yeah. So tell us about that as well, because that just happened.
Yeah, so that's where Bob Watkins left, and then John Pruch took over. So I did two
That's right.
interviews with John recently that kind of like, shed some light on what the changes have been, and I think the main difference from a fan perspective is John seems really focused on getting all of the announcements going. They've been working hard to do that. That should be coming very shortly. He's shared a lot of interesting information in the interviews that I did with him. So they've been making efforts to kind of make up for lost time.
Hmm.
But I think the key thing that Watkins accomplished was, and the folks on his team who were working with him, of course, because he certainly didn't accomplish it by himself, was shepherding NISA through the sanctioning process. But you know now the new team is really focused on getting the launch out. So
Yeah, and there has been more communication. That interview, or the two interviews you did, I think I only read one. I'm sorry, but yeah, things are stepping up there in that way. Do you think? I would say the other main negative has been, it just has never fully gotten up on its feet and running. And now this almost seems like a stutter, stop, start, with only having a few teams. Do you think once they get going, then they'll be able to keep it going and get it started, when they start back up after the winter break?
yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what happens, and I think the fates of NISA and the Founders Cup are very kind of tied together.
Mm.
So the first thing about NISA is I think relative to the Founders Cup, NISA has not received the same sort of warm reception, and that's down to a very simple fact, which is people are excited about clubs; they're not excited about leagues, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And the Founders Cup has some really outstanding clubs. They've got, Detroit City, they've got Chattanooga FC, they've got the New York Cosmos, and they've got kind of the hottest, new club, in my opinion, this year, though I would say that, Forward Madison certainly is a challenger for that, which is the Oakland Roots, who have done an incredible job, with branding and like really, really cool, everything that they've done so far. So and then you've got some really nice NPSL teams that are looking to make a step up. So there's these are these known entities in the Founders Cup, and then with NISA, not so much, right? So there's not like an installed fan base to like rally the flag of NISA, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what we've seen so far in terms of the level of excitement around those two things. It actually makes perfect sense when you break it down like that.
Mhm. But we found, I would say even in USL League One, some of those clubs were not highly touted until they started. And now we're seeing all these podcasts pop up and some grassroots support. So yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is, we'll see. This is what you
Yeah.
said. We'll see. But if they get up and running, I feel like they might be able to get some motivation, some momentum rather, to keep it going and grow. So maybe that's what we're rooting for, to get NISA going. Any other thoughts on NISA before we kind of move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, NISA provides something that I think is important, to the U.S. soccer landscape, which is they provide a place for investors who want to put a team in any market they want to put a team in
Hmm.
across the country, to be able to do that. Right, there are no territory rights. Right, there are no expansion fees. I think those two things are huge issues, um, because they ultimately block building a real kind of pyramid model, right? Because if the challenge USL is going to have if they ever introduce promotion and relegation is that, somebody paid a certain amount of money to be at a certain tier.
Yeah.
And now you're going to send them down and they're going to be at a lower tier. And there are ways you could handle that, but it's awkward. It's just straight up awkward, right? Um, so NISA's not introducing that problem from the beginning, and that was a problem in the NASL. That's a problem in pretty much everything.
Hmm.
I mean, NPSL has franchise fees; they're super low, so it's not a big deal. But you know, they're taking a different approach, which I think is really interesting. And if they're going to have a second team in Charlotte. You know, they're going to have a second team in Atlanta. It'll be interesting to see how those markets react to another team. Atlanta United is clearly, hugely successful. So those are two, I think, polar opposite cases because I don't really think you could say the same about Charlotte Independence, to be fair,
Mhm.
right? So it'll be interesting. I think it's going to be interesting. I, you know, I think it's good for American soccer for NISA to be successful. Um, so I think everybody should root for a positive outcome, and I think the shame is when clubs fold, right?
Yeah.
Because somebody's there are little kids who are a fan of that club. So, look, I'm a Cosmos fan. you know, the team that I dislike the most in American soccer is New York City FC, for all the reasons around, the co-opting of the Cosmos legacy that they attempted to do when they were launching. And it's also just fun to have somebody dislike, right? Uh, I actually don't want to see that team collapse, right? I would not want to see the owners of Manchester United decide that they were going to pull their investment and not want to do that anymore because there are people who are genuinely fans of that club. I would rather, have a system of promotion and relegation where we could go and we could beat them, right? And
Mhm.
and have a rivalry, right? I think it's a shame when the clubs go away. So hopefully these guys can do a great job, launch clubs, give a platform for investors who might be locked out of the USL model to be able to come in and try to do something interesting. And I think that would be all for the better for US soccer.
Yeah, love that, love that. And again, I put a couple notes down. We're gonna stick a pin in a couple of those ideas and bring them back. But before we do that, let's get a little bit of information on the Founders Cup and NPSL. You touched on a little bit of that. Obviously, an awesome lineup of teams, historic teams that will be fun to watch. Some teams with a lot of strong, passionate followings. Yeah, give us a little information about the Founders Cup.
Sure. So the Founders Cup is scheduled to play in the fall. It features, some like we've talked about, some really interesting clubs. Right now they are not sanctioned. Unless that's happened in the last like week or something, and I'm not aware of it. Uh, they're certainly, trying to get sanctioning, but it's kind of a rogue, model one way or another. So there's a fun kind of pirate element about what's going on there, uh, and that sort of suits Detroit City
Yeah.
certainly. It suits what the Cosmos have become, right? So the Cosmos, I think, is interesting. If you look back, like the Cosmos were the status quo in like the late 70s, early 80s, right, of American soccer, and now the Cosmos are like one of the, if not the flagship, like, you know, anti-status quo,
So crazy.
American soccer, right? So, it's interesting, right? But that's kind of what the Founders Cup is, right? It's sort
Yeah.
of this counterculture, to American soccer league. So that makes it exciting. And, I mean, I think it's going to be a lot of fun, but I'm not sure where it goes after the Founders Cup. I'm not sure what the future is right now, for
Mhm.
clubs that are in that. If there's going to be a league beyond that, that was the plan. But it's not clear to me what comes next, right? So hopefully they've got a plan and they'll reveal that, and then everything will come together. But you know, I think it's not 100% clear right now.
Yeah, well, I'm springing this on you, and I'm not as up on my research as I usually am, so I apologize. You can probably already tell that, and how it's gone so far. But someone did, I don't want to say report, someone threw it up on Twitter that a lot of Founders Cup or NPSL teams are considering moving to USL League One in 2020. Is that anything you've heard about? I don't. Or,
I don't think that makes sense for the Founders Cup. I think maybe, you know, I think I know what you're talking about. I think that person was talking more about, and I think that's John from Sock Takes.
oh,
If you're referencing the right, if you're referencing what I think you're referencing,
hmm,
it's from Sock Takes, and I think he was talking more about like NPSL teams that aren't in the Founders Cup, but I could be misremembering. That would make more sense to me than the teams in the Founders Cup. I don't think the fans of Detroit City would tolerate being in USL League
yeah.
One. I mean, Cosmos fans would be up in arms. You would much more easily sell Cosmos fans the championship if, especially if you got rid of the MLS two teams, right? I think you could make that pitch. I think it would not go down 100% smooth, but I think like you could make it, right?
Mm,
You know, and then you know, obviously Chattanooga FC, you know, is clearly not going to be able to do that because of territory rights. So you know, maybe the Oakland Roots could do it because they meet the pro league standards. So it's not like impossible, but it would make more sense that maybe some of the other teams that are waiting and seeing, you know, to see how this all shakes out, who might have an owner who can meet standards, or who might want to do what Lansing United did and bring somebody in. And it kind of with if you look at Lansing, you look at Birmingham. I mean, sure, there's a link to the clubs that were there before, but it's a new brand, you know. It
mhm.
just is replacing what was there, you know. So you know, it's yeah, that could happen, but I think it would be teams that aren't in the Founders Cup more than ones.
Yeah. Shoot, I just went out of it, and that is a huge help. And everything I'm going back and looking at right now is backing up what you said. It was John Leonard from Sock Takes did say that, which I didn't catch on that that was him. But yeah, it just says several teams in NPSL are thinking about moving over to League One in here we go for 2020.
Yeah, I think what you have is you have a bunch of groups who are kind of sitting on the sidelines right now, trying to understand where things are going to be. I
Hmm.
think that what USL brings to the table, whether and the championship is clearly a much more exciting concept given the clubs that are in. Again, it's the clubs that are exciting, right? So
Right.
you look at the clubs that are in the championship, and there are a lot of really quality, interesting clubs. You look at League One, and that's not really the case. And the idea that more MLS two teams are going to move down to USL League One.
Hmm.
When I look at the lineup, like to me, like USL League One is like the least sexy option anybody could take,
For sure.
but you know, it's also low cost. You know, if you just want to have a team and you don't really care who you're playing, like that's cool. It's got Forward Madison who are cool. It's got the Red Wolves who are not cool. Uh, and you know, it's got a bunch of and probably an increasing number of two teams, right? So, you know, it's an option. I would guess that there are probably a bunch of those folks who would rather there be another option, but you know, unless NISA comes together in an interesting way, or unless the
Mhm.
Founders Cup is able to translate that into a compelling league after the Founders Cup that they can sell these people on, you know, they might just look. The safe play is to go to USL League One.
Mhm.
That's how USL League One would get those teams.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with exactly everything you said, and I got that wrong. He was saying that they would go to League Two in 2020 with specific plans to go to League One in 2021. So we're seeing a step system there. I think the only thing that might appeal to those teams that you didn't mention that might go against what you said in a certain way is if promotion and relegation actually happened between League One and Championship. If that happened, or even if these teams that we just talked about are counting on that happening perhaps someday, Do you think some of these teams that have been looking at NISA and Founders Cup or whatever comes after Founders Cup, do you think that would be something a little bit more attractive, especially if two teams drop down to League One, like you were talking about as well?
I mean, yeah, possibly, right? I think if I were selling USL franchises, that's probably the angle I would take
Yeah, right. Well
in a
said.
sense,
Yeah.
right? So, and they probably are because, as I mentioned at the beginning, they're pretty good at doing that.
Right.
Um, so yeah, that would probably be the pitch. So it's just, I think it comes down to whether or not you think that's really going to happen.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, and it's a time thing. It's a time thing because, everyone's recruiting everyone now and they're all talking a big game, but no one has seen, the full potential of what everyone's talking about. And so everyone's kind of competing and I don't know, positioning themselves to try to win over as many teams as possible to win this battle. I kind of want to move into that. I mean, if this was a three-way fight, it could be even a four-way fight with NPSL, NISA, USL, and UPSL, who's now getting sued by USL. There's a lot of teams looking for at least third tier pro soccer in the United States. A lot of them talking about the same kind of stuff. They all offer different potential things. I don't know. Um, where do, how does this end up working out?
So I think the most compelling thing that NISA, the NPSL, and the UPSL could do, and you could include other regional leagues around that are independent leagues, around the country. Like every major city
Mhm.
pretty much has an interesting regional league, like the Cosmo League in New York or the San Francisco, soccer football league in San Francisco. There's a bunch of them, right? They need to work together,
Yeah.
right? Because they're getting um, torn apart, by the partnership of MLS and USL. They need to unite. They need to come together, right? Like it's the person who I quote was not really a person; he's a fictional character. Who I quote on this is Robert Baratheon in the first season of Game of
You are making my day right now.
Thrones. So Robert Baratheon goes. He asks somebody. He says, "What's stronger, 5 armies or one?" Right? And I think the person's reaction was like 5 armies. I forget who it was he was talking to, and he just holds his hand up and he shows 5 fingers, and then he holds up one fist, right? And I think that's what we're looking at here, right? You have this
Great.
separation, these
These
guys
guys.
pulling in different directions, and what they really need to do is they need to become one fist, right?
Yeah.
And they gotta put aside some of their own self-interest. They gotta compromise some of their visions, and they need a leader to bring them together. And that could be Miami FC. Miami FC has now, I think, by entering NISA, by keeping the link to the Founders Cup, Miami FC has become the club who could set the example going forward of building the next level system. And of course, they're involved in the CAS case as well, the Court for Arbitration for Sport case. To bring promotion and relegation to U.S. soccer. So to me, Miami FC has the potential to be the leader of these groups and kind of unite this. But we'll see.
Yeah, we kind of touched on maybe the difficult part of that earlier in that if everyone has a voice and it's all free and the owners are the members of the league without an overarching, king or whatever making the rules, president, CEO, is that too hard to do if you had too many members where you can't get one idea pushing forward? Do you think Miami could do that? And to be honest, I think we've heard rumors that maybe that was the problem originally. Do you think they could pull it together? I guess that's the hard part.
I think if any group can pull it together, it's going to be Miami FC.
Got
They
it.
have the credibility, they have money, and they've demonstrated a willingness to work across the different lines, right? So I think for me, Miami FC is the organization that would be the leader of a unification. The question is, different groups want to work together.
Yeah.
Do they really want to put that aside? And I think there are a lot of the clubs do. So, it's gotta people gotta put egos aside in order to create something bigger than themselves, right? You
Yeah.
gotta you gotta put aside your own self-interest to a certain uh, extent, or at least trust an abundance mentality versus a scarcity mentality that if I help build something bigger, I'm going to increase the size of the pie,
Hmm.
not just worry about increasing my share of the current pie, right? And that's the type of mentality that the clubs need to take. And I think Miami FC is probably the group that can do the most credible job trying to make that happen.
Yeah. Just kind of spitballing here. I'm just thinking about all these separate groups and how the three of them obviously could team up against the USL. And even if they get started separately, there's nothing keeping them from joining at some point and merging if they especially get backed into, a corner and they have no other option to survive but to combine. I could see it almost like being forced on them and them giving it a shot at some point.
Yeah, and I don't think you necessarily have to think of it as against the USL.
Ugh,
You
it's
know,
hard not to though, right? And I shouldn't push that narrative. I think that's a really good point, but man, it's hard not to think of it that way.
Yeah, so I would say that to create a system that is more inclusive, right? To give opportunities for, people to start at the bottom and work their way up, which you can do through buying your way up right now and to a certain extent, right?
Yeah,
And USL is certainly by having more franchises to sell and more territories to sell, they certainly are more open than MLS is. But it can just be something different, right? It can just be. I don't know a whole lot about rugby, but like there are like two different like styles of rugby, right?
mhm.
Like in I think in the UK, right? So maybe it ends up being something like that, right? Two different sets of rules or codes, right? Um, I don't know the terminology. I should stop. But the idea, you understand what I'm saying, is that like
Yeah.
I don't think it necessarily has to be, you know, the, us versus them. I think it can be, you guys do your thing. We're going to do this over here. Um, and maybe there's a way to come bring that together someday, right? I don't know, but that is well beyond, you know, any type of scope to think about right now. Um,
Chris, I think that's my favorite point of the night, actually. And I hope if people have listened to this that they take that away, that I think that's a really good point. I think people need to stop pushing the this person versus that person because granted it is a capitalistic idea. That seems to be the way the battlegrounds are going down, but it doesn't have to be that way. There's enough soccer fans out there for there to be two Charlottes and two Chattanoogas, I think. I mean,
Well,
maybe not,
absolutely. And
but
I think what you have is like what you've seen, like one of the cool things that I think in particular the NPSL has done, because the NPSL I think lends itself to more of a fan base, right, than maybe like the PDL tends to in most cases, right?
mhm,
But you look at like how many Detroit City fans were just like not even soccer fans before Detroit City or Chattanooga fans, right? It's really about building something in those communities, right? So the more opportunities there are to do that, and the more opportunities there are for, somebody who's going to execute well to succeed within that market, regardless of who they paid for a franchise fee or didn't, right?
mm.
I think that's better for U.S. soccer. I think that adds more value for U.S. soccer. So, we'll see how it plays out. But I think that's sort of like the abundance type of mentality, which is like, hey, you can actually grow the share here. You don't have to like think of it as like there's this fixed piece that we're all fighting over. It's like no, you can actually make it bigger.
Right. And yes. Oh, I think that's so good. Yeah. So almost as putting two separate things together almost makes the whole better and bigger. And yeah, I agree with you 100%. I was about to kind of try to see if we were to pitch different leagues, how it would go, but I don't even want to do that because that pits everyone against each other. What I do want to say though is that I think in a lot of ways, I'm in a city in St. Louis that I love USL. I love how much more pure it is than MLS. I'll make that argument any day of the week. But MLS is kind of going a little bit down to the mean, a little tiny bit every year or every other year, as far as league purity in soccer. And you're pointing out a lot of things that are a little more restrictive about even USL compared to the other leagues we're mentioning here. Um, but I could see some of those things backing off. I think the biggest example that perhaps is the negative about the USL is those rights to a state. Certain clubs may have deserved a certain promotion, but now they're not allowed to because the USL accepted someone else in that area or something like that. That's pretty difficult. That's hard to say. We can't have two Charlottes because of rules, not because we can't handle it. So, yeah, I could see this is one of the things you said, MLS coming down to be a little more pure. And I could even see by the end of this in 10, 20 years, 30, 40, 50 years, that the USL could come down and they won't look that much different than NPSL or NISA or whatever the hell we have in that amount of time. And they may at some point decide, listen, we're all here doing the same thing. Let's just put all this together, even if it's just one tournament, that isn't the Open Cup. I could see that sort of thing happening for sure, based on what you're saying.
Yeah, the thing that's funny that you bring up the time frames, right? Like people talk about these really long time frames in which things need to happen, and I do believe like Kyle Martino had his like very long range plan, right? And I think Kyle Martino is a nice guy who I think has really good intentions, and I think he wants things. But it's like, guys, it doesn't need to take this long, right? It doesn't need to take this long. There are people who will invest the money. Rocco just spent what, like 200 million bucks or something buying a club in Italy, right? There are American investors buying clubs all over the place. This doesn't need to take this. You don't have to be dead by the time this happens. You really don't. You just, people just need to work together and think about how do we make the sport in this country a much bigger thing, right?
Mm,
That everyone will benefit from. Not worry about whether Bob Kraft's going to get a good return on investment for something he's invested in over a
mhm,
period of time. He'll be okay. Someone will pay if he doesn't want to participate. Someone's going to buy that team from him, and he'll make a nice return on investment, and he'll be fine, right? It's that how do we grow it versus like how do I protect my little piece of this fixed pie that's never going to grow.
mm. I, I'm with you there, and I like that you brought up craft because in some ways, I'm always someone that likes to be realistic. I like to get these dreamy ideas out there, but then I do like to be brought back down to earth. And I find that to be perhaps restrictive as someone like Kraft. Yeah, he would make a return on his investment, but in the back of his mind, he's probably thinking how much more of a return could I get if I don't let this happen or if I don't change the way I do things. I feel like that could be a thing.
It's clearly seems to be the way that you know I don't know individual owners, but it seems to be the way that MLS processes it, right? Is that they want to control the top tier and sort of funnel all the money, as much money as possible into MLS um, through Soccer United marketing. But I think there's the counter argument that like they are actually limiting the growth by doing that.
Hmm. Yeah. And we are getting it seems like there's a slight split in MLS even between, I think we've even heard certain people say, higher up people say that the right owners in MLS and the wrong owners in MLS. And so that's an interesting thing too. So where maybe this narrative, not this narrative, maybe this belief, this thought process is kind of breaking through the dirty stuff, and maybe
Yeah.
you and I together can try to help spread the right message in our opinions at least, right?
What I mean, think about without all the crazy, acronym rules and salary rules, what could Arthur Blank make Atlanta United into? It could probably be a world class, you know, club if it were kind of in the more traditional model because you have they're generating a lot of revenue standing on their own. You have an owner who's into it, who's very rich, who's willing to spend the money. I mean,
Mm.
that profile around the world looks like a super club, right? But it's kind of constrained within the current structure.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite my favorite new debate from last week was who should the new Miami club, bring in, James or Suarez? And take the reins off and get them both. Screw it.
Yeah, and I mean, that would, probably be a good thing, right? But, you know, we'll see. I mean, I think one thing, if you talk about things that could have gone differently, I really wonder what would have it looked like if we didn't win the 2026 World Cup bid. What would have happened?
Mhm.
Because what would that have meant financially for MLS, right? And kind of like how they keep accepting expansion teams, and that kind of helps with the losses, right? There's this big windfall of money coming for Soccer United marketing, most likely in 2026 now. What if that didn't come? What if Morocco won? Would USL have been in a position to sort of replace an MLS who started to get owners of tired of losing money, right? That's kind of like an else world that I think is actually really interesting because clearly USL is the best positioned to do that right now.
No, can you go more into that? Because I think I'm tracking you, but I want more details on how your brain is processing that exactly.
so MLS, is regularly expanding, and I think the idea there is that it, MLS is not making money in and of itself for most organizations, right? Some of the owners, sometimes like Saputo and in Montreal, will kind of break rank and complain about it, right?
Mhm.
So the expansion fees are helping subsidize this, right? But that can only go on for so long, right? And now, Soccer United Marketing is clearly going to benefit from the World Cup being here, right? That's going to be a big windfall. How much does that happening really help keep the wind in the sails of MLS? Conversely, if that didn't happen, if it went to Morocco, what
Mhm.
would how much wind would that have taken out of the sails of MLS? I just think it's an interesting kind of like thing to think about, is that how
Yeah.
pivotal that probably was for Major League Soccer and
Yep.
Soccer United Marketing.
Mhm. And it all feels like, a bridge to hopefully TV media rights actually getting money into that system to replace the expansion fees. I assume, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be eventually that's going to need to happen, right?
Yeah.
Eventually, it's going to need to organically kind of generate revenue without expanding, sort of forever. But
But if that stacked deck that MLS has right now, it's a little bit stacked.
right, it's pretty
If that
stacked.
hadn't worked out, then perhaps money, you know, making that bridge isn't the answer, and then these interesting pure soccer ideas maybe take over, and it looks different.
Mhm.
Is that kind of what you're getting at? Because that's sounding really
Yeah.
nice right now.
Well, what? Yeah, I mean, look, there's the USL Championship, and like, there's this blank space above it that
Yeah.
could be like USL Premier, right?
Mhm.
And maybe then, I mean, I kind of think USL better run organization than MLS. I mean, maybe that's the lower league soccer bias, right? Like, because like I'd take USL any day over MLS, right?
Yeah.
When like just in terms of like enjoying watching the matches, right?
Yeah.
So would that have been a possible outcome, right? Because given what they're working with, you know, and not having as much federation support, even though they have quite a bit relative to the other players, could USL have kind of filled that gap, right? If
Yeah.
in a fair fight with MLS, you know, is Jake Edwards doing a better job than Don Garber? I think there's probably a case that Jake Edwards is doing a better job than Don Garber.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, they do have different business models that probably both revolve around getting money a certain way. But I do think in St. Louis, honestly, when we lost another expansion bid and it just started feeling more and more rigged, and not that it's not just as rigged now, considering all the, if St. Louis gets in, then we're getting up to what, 36 or something. They're making it up as they go for a lot of the reasons we were just talking about. So my point is not to go off on MLS more. My point is, after the last loss of the expansion bid, I was feeling very disenfranchised, and I started looking around at all the other teams that might be feeling disenfranchised. And there's some really good cities that might be there for the plucking if MLS was to stop expanding, that deserve a tier one team that would be willing to spend the money for a tier one team. And so, yeah, my immediate thoughts, I've said this publicly multiple times, was man, give me a St. Louis, a Phoenix, an Indy, a Tampa Bay. Give me a USL Premier with those teams that are willing to spend a little less in MLS, but it's still better than USL in tier two, and have them build stadiums that are 10 to 12,000 and just see what happens. And if MLS was to do that fake thing that possibly could have happened if we weren't to get the World Cup, that would have looked pretty damn good, right?
Absolutely, and then, and don't invite the MLS 2 teams into the USL Premier,
Yeah.
and you immediately have a really interesting product, right? If you take the
Mhm.
Las Vegas and, like, the top tier USL, clubs, no MLS 2 invited to this particular party, and then, you have a lot of interesting markets, big markets. There was the whole David Villa, idea, in Queens. I don't honestly don't know where that's at right now. Uh,
Mm.
but you have the opportunity. There was the Chicago effort, right? That seems like it's kind of fizzled out, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
But if those types of things could be pulled off, all of a sudden it doesn't take too long for a USL Premier to become a kind of a really compelling alternative.
Yeah. There was a very short period of time where that idea in the back of my mind was still alive and Chicago was an option. What is the San Diego, or there's some other big one that was supposed to happen on the West Coast as well. Queensboro had maybe just been announced, and I just started letting loose with my daydreams. USL Premier League. It sounded so good.
Yeah, yeah, you're starting to sound like an NASL fan, man.
Right. I'm joining the piracy of NASL.
Right.
Uh,
That's the funny part is, like, you go on, like, the USL Reddit, like, as a NASL guy, and I know there's a bunch of the guys there who
mhm,
used to be NASL guys with some of the teams that moved over, but you'll see this topic, like, people get going on this topic and get excited about it. It's like, you guys are right now, you're just being NASL fans, right? Like, you guys are all making fun of us, but you're just doing the same thing right now, right? Because everybody gets excited about that alternative because I think that, the what we have now isn't super inspiring, at the top.
mhm. Yep. Yep. But like I said, it is getting better. I think we should hand it to them that they are starting to move in the right direction finally, even if it's incredibly slowly and at a crawling pace. But maybe all of American soccer is kind of moving toward the mean. And then, perhaps, this wouldn't even be a bad thing. Perhaps NPSL, Founders Cup, NISA, maybe they're going to get some better business smarts and they're going to start figuring out how financially to keep a club afloat with smart decisions, but still have that pure soccer. And they're going to be able to make the right decisions, even though there's a million of them in a group. And perhaps MLS is going to start moving toward more pure soccer, not limiting salaries, not limiting how many of whatever, all the rules that we all like to make fun of constantly. Maybe eventually they'll get rid of those things. This is, we've kind of covered this, but it is sort of moving that way, isn't it?
Well, it would certainly be nice, if everybody came together, and, I think the if I were sitting in the shoes of the folks, in the Founders Cup and in NISA, and NPSL and UPSL, I would be focusing on controlling what I can control. Try to find a way to work together and
Mhm.
build something that is compelling, and then maybe that'll inspire further steps from others.
Well, Chris, I'm doing that thing where I get excited about something and I start talking in circles. So I think this is probably a good place to cut it off with that final message of, let's work together as a country for the better of soccer. I really like that idea. I encourage, this is the USL show, and we're talking to Chris Kivlan about NISA and NPSL. This is the kind of stuff that needs to happen more often, to be honest with you. We need to have more cooperation. We don't need to be enemies. We can talk, we can work out ideas, we can cooperate. This is the kind of thing that needs to happen more often. You heard it here, maybe first, right?
Yeah, and you know what? Let's take the most, like, example that divides people the most, right, from this whole world, right? The Chattanooga Red Wolves versus Chattanooga,
Mm,
FC, right? You know, here's the thing I tell people about that is, like, if the guys who were in Chattanooga who wanted to break off and form their own club, they should totally be able to do that. The problem is the way that the federation, I lay it at the federation, has the system set up is that they can leapfrog the established club just by, bringing in an outside investor with a lot of money. If the system was structured in a way where they had to start at whatever the bottom tier was and get themselves up to the tier that Chattanooga FC's in, that's like an awesome rivalry. Like that,
Mhm.
like a really great rivalry, right? But instead, you get like the sort of negative intrigue that happened there, right? And it's all a product of the system, right? Like nobody should like necessarily be able to tell those guys they can't start their own club, right? It's just the way that it happened, right? And the system creates the conditions in which that is the way people go about things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's more of that enfranchising, that from rules. Yeah. And in England's been doing soccer for a long time. Germany's been playing soccer for a long time, and they've got a pretty good system going there, that doesn't disenfranchise people quite as
Mhm.
badly in these ways, at least. They have their own problems. So, and we're not here to say that they're perfect, but some of the things we don't like here, I think we have pretty good examples of how to fix those things. So we'll get there. We'll get there.
There's definitely a nicely designed wheel, and for whatever reason, we keep trying to reinvent the wheel.
Well, maybe we'll make more money on a square wheel,
Right.
All right, man. Chris, tell everyone where they can find your work. I recommend everybody go looks this up.
Cool. So the website is midfieldpress.com. And then I also just do a lot of stuff on Twitter. So it's just my last name, KIV as in Victor, LEHAN as in Norm. Uh, so it's Kivlahan, and you can follow me on Twitter, or you can follow Midfield Press, the website. Either one. That's where my stuff goes.
Chris, I've really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for joining me today, man.
Thanks for having me.